The narcissist shared fantasy, a gateway of elation. At the core of every narcissistic interaction is a fantasy, but not one of love. It is a fantasy of self repair cast upon the other. Sam Vaknin describes the shared fantasy as a co authored delusional bond in which the narcissist casts the partner as both savior and subordinate. It is not merely romantic idealization, it is an ontological merger born from narcissistic need, powered by grandiosity, and structured by psychodynamic self deception. It begins not with affection, but with strategy. The entry point of the shared fantasy is narcissistic elation, a euphoric oceanic state of being wherein the narcissist feels, often for the first time, complete. This is not joy in another person, but joy in the return of a stabilized self concept via the projected ideal. Facton writes narcissistic elation is the euphoria of regaining the mother's gaze by proxy. It is the rapture of self recognition disguised as love. In the spotting and auditioning phases, what lay people call love bombing, the narcissist scans for vulnerability, compliance, intelligence, and symbolic usefulness. This is not affection, but object acquisition. The partner is not chosen for who they are, but how efficiently they can serve as the idealized mirror. At this stage, the narcissist is not yet devaluing. On the contrary, they are investing psychic energy, cathexis, with full force. The idealized object is being built, a psychic mother, lover, savior, trophy, and audience, all in one. Vaknin describes the five energetic phases in this sequence: cathexis, emotional investment into the object; hypercathexis, overinvestment, mirroring, and fusing; hypocathexis, emotional withdrawal and coldness begins; decathexis, abandonment and psychic severing; anticathexis, reinvestment into a new object to repress persecutory feelings and maintain self stability. What the partner experience in this initial cathexis phase is a wave of euphoria, not simply being loved, but being needed. Their own wounds become animated through the promise of repair, to be chosen, to be seen, to be safe. In MPIT, this is the activation of the redeemer ego, a self state formed in childhood that longed to be recognized as the one who could finally make the abuser well. This early fusion creates a mirrored loop. The narcissist is elated by the return of the projected perfection. The partner is animated by the fantasy of being enough. But beneath this dual euphoria lies a dread, the dread of knowing. For the survivor, the fantasy feels almost too perfect. In private moments, they question it, but compliance wins out. The love feels oceanic, and the fantasy seems healing. To break it would be to destroy their last hope of being loved as they are. So both parties continue, both willingly and unconsciously, and the shared fantasy deepens. The narcissist, now fully merged with the idealized object, begins to drift. This is not conscious betrayal, it is the structural exhaustion of the fantasy. The shared gaze can no longer hold. The partner is no longer novel. The internalized mother object begins to disappoint. The original need to complete the narcissist's fractured self resurfaces unmet. This initiates hypocathexis, the partial withdrawal of libidinal energy from the object. It is quiet, it is invisible. It often begins within a short period of time, depending on how fast the narcissist detects the imperfections in their partner, imperfections which they themselves once praised. Vaknin explains the narcissist grows disillusioned not because the partner changed, but because the fantasy collapsed. He experiences it as betrayal, but it is merely realism creeping in. For the partner, the shift is unbearable. The emotional warmth recedes, playful teasing becomes sarcastic dismissal, shared rituals are abandoned, eye contact loses depth, sex becomes mechanical, affection becomes intermittent, cold one day, intense the next. This is not randomness, it is calculated emotional recalibration. The narcissist unconsciously adjusting their attachment levels to prepare for the inevitable collapse. They are now splitting the object. In Fairbairn's terms, the good object is being demoted. In MPIT, this is the emergence of the introject co-option, where the survivor internalizes not only the disappointment of the narcissist, but begins to see themselves through that gaze. The survivor, still fused in the fantasy, responds not by leaving, but by working harder. This is the tragedy. The more the narcissist withdraws, the more the survivor tries to become the fantasy. This deepens the creation of the pseudo false self, a self structure built to mirror the narcissist's desire, suppressing the survivor's own affect in order to remain ideal. MPIT marks this moment as the initiation of internal fragmentation. The survivor begins splitting, the true self pushed down, the redeemer ego over functioning, and the pseudo false self taking over daily relating. This fragmentation is not noticed by others. It looks like devotion, it feels like love, but symbolically, it is the beginning of death. Decathexis and the silent erasure. The object is emptied, the fantasy no longer needed. What remains is silence, severance, and symbolic death. If hypocathexis is the slow withdrawal of love, decathexis is the final extraction of meaning. In classical psychodynamic terms, decathexis refers to the complete removal of libidinal energy from an internal object. In narcissistic dynamics, this is the final stage of object disposal, the point at which the survivor is no longer needed to regulate the narcissist's internal world, not even as a scapegoat, not even as a projection screen. They are rendered null. As Vaknin teaches, this is not a theatrical discard. There is no rage, no explosion, just the silent erasure. The survivor, once the mirror, the muse, the idealized redeemer, is now an internal irritation. The narcissist no longer feels rewarded by their presence. The object is contaminated, and they can no longer support the shared fantasy. There is nothing left to reflect. Cold withdrawal follows. But what is missed in most clinical literature is what happens before this event. Thousands of micro decathexes that occur during the hypocathexis phase. Each act of mocking, each emotionally withheld moment, each invisible snub. These were not glitches in the bond, they were internal rehearsals for the discard. The narcissist, overwhelmed by engulfment anxiety, widening grandiosity gaps, begins to test reality. They hoover, recalibrate, idealize again, only to devalue once more. These repetitions are not accidents, they are rituals of emotional distancing. Each cycle takes them one step closer to feeling nothing. That is the goal, affective extension. And then it comes. The final decathexis is swift, cold, performed with ease. The object is discarded, not in hatred, but in total absence of care. MPIT maps this moment as the catastrophic collapse of symbolic meaning for the survivor. Their world, constructed entirely around emotional calibration to the narcissist, loses its center. The survivor was not just in love, they were fused, psychically interwoven with the fantasy. So when the narcissist disappears, they take more than presence, they take authorship. The survivor is left with an empty gaze, no closure, no truth, no reason. This is where collapse-induced psychotic regression occurs. The mind, unmoored from symbolic reality, begins to fragment. What follows is not grief, but unreality. The survivor asks, was any of it real? Was I loved? Did I imagine it all? In MPIT, this is the collapse of the libidinal, anti-libidinal loop. The survivor, once trapped in a loop of pleasing and appeasing, now holds the projection of the bad object.